So my name is Matt Balcombe, and this is my campfire story. I'm just going to share a story about the first year that I went out working for an outfitter in Northwest Ontario, guiding fly-in moose hunts. So I guess this story took place in 2018 in the fall. I had decided that becoming a hunting guide was something that I really wanted to do. I was just working a 9-to-5 office job prior to that, and I was looking for a little bit more excitement, something I could do a couple of weeks a year. So basically I started making posts on various outfitters websites or provincial outfitter associations websites, message boards and classifieds ads, and ended up getting connected with an outfitter in Northwest Ontario who called me up and was looking for some guys to work for him that fall, guiding moose hunts, and it sounded something that was pretty exciting, so I decided to hop on board with that. So basically the deal was for this year he needed somebody to fill in for 1 week, so I was going to fly out Northwest Ontario. The outfitter was based in Red Lake, which for context is something like a 7-hour drive northwest of Thunder Bay. So you're decently up there. So I pack all the gear that I think I'll need, fly to Winnipeg, catch a cab to a float plane base in Selkirk, an hour north of Winnipeg, pick up a truck there, drive the 6 hours to Red Lake, and roll up and then meet this guy for the first time. So nice guy, do the sort of greetings and catch a few hours of sleep for the night, and then the next morning they say I'm going to fly up to where the tent camps are. So they operate these moose hunts out of sort of prospector style canvas tents, and I'm going to fly up that day, and then my clients are going to come in the day after, so I'll have a day to sort of get the camp all set up. So I hop in the float plane with one of the pilots, and the plan is that where they have this cluster of camps, they have them sort of spattered in one kind of area about 180 kilometers northeast of Red Lake. So they don't like to fly up there for no reason. If they're going to fly up there, they don't like to fly up for one thing only. They try and do things in groups. So the plan is we're going to stop at one camp, pick up one of the guides who's got to go somewhere else, stop in at another camp, drop off some supplies, and at that camp there's a group of hunters that are supposed to be leaving, and they're going to give me their sat phone because they're getting flown out that day, and then I'll take their satellite phone with me to the next camp. So we land at that camp, and it becomes apparent that there's been a bit of a mix-up, and these guys are staying for another day, so they need to keep their sat phone. And so the pilot just kind of looks at me and says, sorry, man, I don't have anything else to give you, so you're just going to have to go without one. So fair enough. So we pack back up, take off from that lake, and then finally land in the lake that I'm going to. He drops me off, so we go up to the camp, and essentially the camp setup is one 14 by 16 canvas prospector tent, and then one of those sort of temporary tarp garage setups for a cook tent, and all the food is in there. So fair enough, I get squared away. Pilot just turns around, takes off, and heads back to town, and I spend the rest of that day getting camp set up. The next day, I kind of puttered around in the boat a little bit, split some more firewood, and it was getting pretty cold at that point, and through the night, it kind of become apparent this camp had been used for 2 weeks prior to my arrival. There had been other groups in there, and they hadn't been all that careful about how they were storing their food. So I go into the canvas tent the first time, and there's a big tote of Halloween candy, little chocolate bars and stuff. And I thought it was kind of strange. I wouldn't normally keep a bunch of food in where I'm sleeping. So I thought that was odd. And at night, off in the cook tent, I could hear pots rattling and stuff through the night. So I think there was little squirrels and raccoons getting in there. So that was kind of the first sign that something might be up. So then the next day, my hunters are supposed to arrive. So I'm kind of waiting around camp most of the day, and the day goes on and on and on and on, and nobody shows up. And now, by the end of the day, I'd split all the wood I could split. Plane hasn't come back yet, and I have no way to communicate with the outside world. So that was getting a little unnerving. And then that night, I think it was that night, the snow started. So I got a little dumping of snow that night. I had to get up 2 or 3 times through the night to push snow like off the roof of the tent because I was afraid it was gonna collapse in. It was like a wet, heavy snow. And get up in the morning, leave the tent, and there's just like animal tracks all over the place. So obviously, with the kind of the poor food management practices, whoever was in there before me they had attracted quite a few animals to the site. So anyway, that was a little unnerving. So waited that whole day. It kind of cleared up, and it was sort of a hazy day again. Another day goes by, plane doesn't come back. And so I'm starting to get kind of nervous at this point because I'd only really talked to this outfitter once on the phone. I'm thinking in my head, like, did he forget about me? Like, what's happening? And basically that goes on and on I ended up being there alone for 4 days without any contact with the outside world. And so there was a little bit anxious by the end of that. And where it started to get really dicey was like on the third day, there was a really big snowstorm. Like it dumped 6 or 8 inches of really wet, heavy snow. And I was up all through the night trying to keep the tent clear because I was just terrified it was going to collapse. So I was kind of like, that was kind of my struggle the whole time while I was up there alone. And then finally on like day 4, I come out of the tent in the morning and I can hear this rattling, and I look and there's like a 3-foot tall fisher, like a big black weasel, and he's kind of up against the side of the cook tent and just stares me down. And I had to try running at him like a couple of times to actually scare him off because he was pretty bold, and clearly he'd been in there and gotten some food before. So I had to run him off, and that was a little unnerving. And later on that day, finally, I hear like the drone of a plane coming in, and I see the beaver finally come in for landing. So these guys, and what it had turned out was, even though there was, periods of good weather up where I was down south where these guys were flying out of, the weather had been really bad. So there was just no way to get them out on the plane. So that was all good. The hunters got dropped off. So it was 2 guys from Wisconsin, and just really, really nice fellas. And we got along really well. Had a good, they only had 3 days left in their hunt. So we had a good time. And so usually like the first thing when clients get dropped off is I try and just do obviously like a safety briefing with them, show them around camp, and kind of give them the lay of the land. And I try to stress the importance of, try and keep all the food in the cook tent, keep everything sealed up. Like, don't bring any food into the sleep tent, because animals getting into the cook tent's one thing, but we really don't want to be dealing with them where we're sleeping. So I kind of make all that clear, and we go off hunting for the day out in the boat, and it's all good. We're off basically for the whole day, and we come back right at dark essentially. So it was a pretty cold day, and I had a few things to square away down at the boat. So I tell the guys, like, go on, head up to the tent, like get the wood stove lit, warm up, get into some warm clothes or dry clothes. I'll square things away down here and I'll be up in a minute. So I do my thing, get the boat bailed out, top off the gas, and I'm walking up the path to the camp. And just as I get to the top, I can see both hunters are standing outside of our tent, and they've got the 2 front flaps of this canvas tent pinned wide open. And I'm just like, oh my God, this can't be good, whatever this is. So I ask, like, what happened? And basically they say, there's a skunk in the tent. I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, there's a skunk in the tent. It's under the cot. And so, like, well, oh my God, like, if this thing sprays in the tent, this is a trip ender. This is no good. So we're trying to sort of gently like tap around the canvas, around the base of the tent, and spook it out. And finally, like, I think I was in the front of the tent, another guy was at the side, and another guy was at the back of the tent. And finally this thing spooks enough, and it takes off out the front door. So I jumped back, it wheeled the corner and ran around behind the tent. And all I hear was like, one of the hunters, Dan, had a really, really deep voice, like a really deep, gravelly voice. And I just hear the highest pitched scream from behind the tent, because I guess basically this skunk was running behind the tent and it rounded the back corner, but Dan was standing right there, and it essentially just crashed into him and went up to about his knee before it realized what it was doing, turned around and took off. So anyway, the skunk took off, and we kind of regroup, and I say, like, guys, what happened? Like, what was it after in there? And it turns out that these fellows from Wisconsin had brought up 2 things with them to camp. They brought a whole bunch of nice Wisconsin cheese, and they brought a big bag of Honeycrisp apples, and they had stashed it underneath one of their cots, and that skunk had sniffed that stuff out and got into it. So we rectified that, like everything back in the cook tent, kind of said, okay guys, no more food in the tent, please. And that was that. So we pack up and get supper going and have our meal and go to bed. And we're in bed, and I remember waking up to the sound of what I thought it must have snowed again, and I could hear ice sliding down the roof of this canvas tent, like a scratching noise. And so I fall back asleep, and then I hear it again, and I started wondering, like, what is that noise? Like, there can't be that much ice building up that it's sliding down like that. And then I hear one of the hunters sort of wake up and goes, Matt, is that you? I said, Dan, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, I realized what it is the way that these tents are configured. The upper part is canvas, so it's sort of a slope, like you picture sort of your typical A-frame tent, canvas roof and canvas wall, and then the bottom is sort of a flap that's made of a kind of a tarp material, and you kind of, lay that flat and then put some logs around the edge to hold the edge down. And what it is the skunk is back, and he's trying to dig his way underneath the wall of the tent, like right next to my head, basically. And it's what I'm hearing is the sound of him scratching against the tarp trying to get through. So again, this is like 3 a.m. All of us are up out of the tent with flashlights. We run the skunk off, but for the rest of the trip he became a bit of a pain. So yeah, we ran him off that night, go back to sleep, and then periodically, like every couple of hours, you'd hear him scratching again, trying to get in at whatever was inside the tent. So that was that. Then the next day, more of the same thing. We kind of get up for the day, go out for our hunt, and then that day the guys ended up getting their moose. So that was great. I think we got the moose at 3:00 in the afternoon. And if anybody's not familiar, it takes a really long time to process one down. So by the time we're done dealing with this moose, it's like 7:30 and it's dark. So we get all the meat loaded up in the boat, and so we get all the meat loaded up in the boat, and we're kind of putting back to camp because we're a couple kilometers away, and it's fully dark at this point. So we're just barely crawling along. So made for a really long night when we get back. By now it's 8:30 or something, so we just have enough energy to cook supper, go to crawl into the tent again, and sure enough, we open up the door and we hear something rustle and hide underneath one of the cots, and like the skunk is back again. Just the absolute last thing we want to deal with. So that precedes another half an hour of peeling back the flaps on the tent and rattling around the sides trying to chase this thing out, and we finally managed to flush this thing out of the tent one more time, and that was about it. But that was a little bit of excitement for my first year of guiding up in Ontario, just between getting weather-bound alone up there and then fending off fishers and skunks out of our tent and trying to keep things clean. It was definitely an interesting experience, and I think it makes for a decent story to tell around the campfire.
All right, that was Matt Balcombe. Thanks, Matt, for coming on. If you want to find out more information about Matt, he is a backcountry fly fishing guide. You can find him at Instagram at Balco_outdoors. And if you have a story that you want to share with us, contact us at hello@novacamp.ca. Thanks, guys.